my goal is for this to be a bit interactive. So especially at the end, I'm going to leave like 15 minutes for you guys to actually start working on building your personal website. And so if you want to follow along on my slides, I'll post them in the chat for the Zoom. You can open them from there, or if you guys are able to get the QR code to work, feel free to try. But yeah, so thank you all so much for coming. I'm super hyped to be doing this because I've been wanting to hold this for a long time now. So for those who don't know me, I'm Rachel Moglen. I'm a PhD student in RIE. And yeah, let's get started. Hold on, I've got like too many mice hanging around. All right. So first, a little bit of a qualifying statement. So this website or this workshop is intended as a hands-on guide to building a personal website. So we're going to talk about things about like how to host your website, how to create it, what types of components you should include, as well as a bunch of examples that we're going to look at. But it is not an introduction to HTML and CSS. So the main reason for that is I am not an expert in HTML or CSS, so I don't feel qualified to teach you that. But I think that's also a good thing that this isn't an introduction to HTML and CSS, because I think it shows that you don't need to know those things in order to build a website. Those aren't necessary to be able to do this. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about why you should want to build a personal website. So, I mean, all of y'all are here, so hopefully you're already slightly convinced of that. But you know, maybe you're just here for the snack. So going to do a little bit more to motivate that. And then we're going to look at a whole bunch of examples. So for me, when I was building my personal website, it was really helpful to just go through a whole bunch of examples and see like, oh, I like this from this person's website, and I like this from this person's website, and just kind of mush them all together. So I think we're going to do a little bit of that today. And then from there, we're kind of going to identify some of the things that you really want to include in your website, and then some things maybe that you can include if you want to. And then we're going to talk about some of the nuts and bolts of building a personal website. So these are things like hosting options and how much all of them cost. Because at least for me, when I was picking out where I wanted to build my website and how I wanted to host it, it was really kind of confusing how much they cost. There's like different components. So yeah, we're going to talk about that for some very specific examples. And hopefully you can walk away from this workshop having identified specifically what type of platform you want to use to host and build your website. And then finally, we're going to get started. And this is where I encourage all of you to take the time at the end of this workshop to actually start building your website. So for me, I think I had an idea in mind for a really long time that I wanted to build a website. And then it took a while for me to like actually, go and do it. So that's the goal of this last 15 minutes is we're going to actually do it. So you'll have at least that started. And so hopefully from there, you'll actually continue and finish it. So first, a little bit about why you should build a personal website. So these are just some things I think I thought of as I was pondering this question. And I think it's really useful to keep these in mind because sometimes you get tired of making it. And so you might stop halfway through. And so, consider these good reasons that you can return to help you, finish the task. So I think the first and foremost reason that I wanted to build a website was to communicate who I was beyond just my CV. So I think your CV is like a very sterile document. It's not super exciting. I mean, like, it's a list of all the cool things you've done, but it's very boring. And, they kind of all start to blur together if you're a person conducting a job search. And so I think a website is a way to make yourself stand out beyond that. And so here I have a screenshot from PD, who is a student in RIE. And I think this is a really cool part of his website. He has like different travel pictures that he has on his website. So, I think just humanizing yourself a little bit more, you're more than just like a name on a page. I think that's one of the real values of having a personal website. Apart from that, I think it's really good for just visibility. So the number of times that I am communicating with somebody new and I don't really know that much about them and they have their website in their email signature, I find it super useful to get to be able to click on that and learn a little bit more about them without, necessarily having to go through like the whole social interaction part of things. So I think it's super useful. And then also like, you're presenting at a conference, somebody wants to learn a little bit more about you. All they have to do is Google your name. And if your website pops up, then they get to know a little bit more about you that way. And then again, in job searches, I think it really helps humanize you and maybe makes you stand out a bit. And then it's also a great platform for sharing less rigorous research ideas or just kind of things you find cool. So a couple of the website examples that we're going to look at today have this. So like I have a blog on my website that's just different recipes that I like. I think Dr. Boyles has some like funny, like his like academic lineage on his website. So, you know, there's all sorts of just kind of fun things that you can include if you want to. And I don't know, I think kind of feeds the egotistical part of all of us to just get to chat about ourselves a bit. And then I think it's also really nice to centralize your presence online. So, you know, all of your social links can kind of be pointing out from this location. So it's nice to have everything all centralized. And then finally, it's fun. Hopefully you find it fun. I mean, personally, that was like the main reason I did it, is like, you know, all these things are all well and good. So before we jump into things, I just wanted to distinguish between the idea of website hosting and domain registration. So these are two things that I think it took me a little while to figure out like what the difference is between the two of them, because for a lot of the different platforms like Squarespace, they're kind of mushed together in a very confusing way. But really, there are two distinct processes that are necessary. They're both necessary for building your personal website. So the first is website hosting. So this is where all the actual files associated with your website are. So for instance, this is a screenshot of my GitHub, which is how I choose to host my website. And so you can see there are like actual files. There's a folder for CSS and there's HTML files and all the image files. So this is, I'm using GitHub to host my website. And then similarly, there's some websites that not only help you host your website, but also help you actually build it. So these are the things like Google Sites or Squarespace. These are the different website hosting and building options. And then completely separately from that, or sometimes completely separately from that, is domain registration. So this is the actual purchase of the URL that you use for your website. And so this part is kind of confusing because for some services like Squarespace, it's kind of included in the package. But otherwise, it is generally something that you do completely separately. And to purchase a domain is somewhere on the range of like $10 per year. So it's not too bad. Or if you choose to host through GitHub, which is what I do, it's actually free if you're okay with the .github.io at the end of your URL. So I think it's kind of cool to have .github.io at the end of mine. So I was like totally cool with that. But yeah, there's kind of these two separate processes involved. And I guess I'll stop here. Does anybody have any questions? No? Okay. So now I think we're going to look at a couple of example websites. Oh, looks like there's something in the chat, maybe. Okay, cool. All right, so now we're going to look at a couple of website examples just to like highlight some of the things that I like, some of the things that I don't like. And we'll start with mine since it's the one I'm most familiar with. And so again, here I want to point out this, that you can look at the URL and that tells you a little bit about the website. So you'll notice a bunch of the ones that we're going to look at today are hosted using .github.io. So that's what mine is. And a couple of other things that you'll see common across a lot of the websites, you know, an about me section, a place where you can actually download the PDF of your resume or CV. And then, so as I mentioned, I also have like a blog on my website. So a couple of personal touches, personal details, places I've traveled. I had fun making this. So yeah, there's all sorts of things you can add to your website. And, you know, having chosen GitHub as the way I've been hosting my website, there's a lot of flexibility that comes with that. It's just kind of up to you to decide how much time you want to invest in it. So now we can look at Yutong. So Yutong is another student in RIE. And I think her website is really great. I think it's very nice and clear. You know, it has all of the important things. So, you know, it has a little bit about her. It really highlights her publications well, has a little bit of extra detail about her research, again, has her CV. But again, pointing you to look at the URL associated with her website, you can see that she has a sites.utexas.edu website. And so I was looking into this because I thought maybe this could be a really good option for all of us. You know, if we can host our website through UTexas, then, you know, maybe that's free. And, you know, I think there's a decent amount of credibility with having a UTexas website. But I did contact them and they said that once you graduate, you will lose access to your website. So, you know, if you want to go that route, I would definitely keep that in mind, that you will lose access to being able to modify your website. And then they said they actually delete it, I think, after 1 year. So definitely keep that in mind. And so I think at the end, I don't actually recommend this as an option because I think that kind of sucks. I think you should be able to keep your website with you throughout your career, and you don't have to start over when you leave UT. And now, as Ella pointed out, we'll look at Steve Boyles' website, because I think this one is super cool. So Steve Boyles, for those who don't know him, is a professor in the civil engineering department here at UT. And again, you'll see he has a GitHub website. I think it's kind of like a nerd chic option to go with github.io. I think it's just super cool. But I think part of me also just likes the fact that it's free. But yeah, so clearly he has gone the route of much less formatting in his website, you know, white background, black text. But again, he still has some of those like personal details that make him stand out a little bit more than just like if you were to just post his CV essentially as his website. So, you know, he has some trivia, his academic genealogy. So I think this is a good example of just the fact that you don't necessarily need to put a whole bunch of bells and whistles on your website. If you don't want to, you can totally just write it, and probably this doesn't even really have CSS associated with it. This is probably just like HTML files. So yeah, that's definitely an option. Let me close these. And then I think we'll skip over Nikki's. But I think one thing that I liked about hers was she has an embedded Twitter. So if you're super into your Twitter account, maybe that's something you want to put in your website. You can look at Eric's website. So I really like Eric's website. And I think part of the reason that his is so glamorous at the moment is I know he was just on the academic job market. So I think he might have zhuzhed it up a little bit for that. But here you'll see that he appears to have chosen to purchase a domain for himself. So that's definitely an option. And I'm not quite sure what he's using to host it, but it does say often with websites, you can see all the way at the bottom a little bit about how they were created. And so his says it was published with this open source website builder. And I looked a little bit into it, and it looks like it's still connected to GitHub, but I'm not totally sure. So, you know, if you like his website, that might be something to look into. But things that I really liked about it, I really liked how he, it really highlights his publications well, which, you know, as academics is very important to us. And then similarly to mine, his is all one page. So you're just kind of scrolling up and down. He has, you know, his projects. And I think these are like a little bit more like blog post type style. So a little bit more detail. So, you know, just another way of presenting the information. I think he did it in a particularly aesthetically pleasing way. So I'd love to know how he actually created his website. Then we can look at Jason's. So the reason I chose Jason, so this is a colleague that I just started working with, is I don't know specifically how he's creating his website, but it does say Google Sites there. So I suspect he chose Google Sites to help him build his website. And when we get to like the different options, I think Google Sites is honestly a really good way to try and build your website, if particularly if you're not super into the idea of building the HTML and CSS yourself. But yeah, again, a lot of the common things that we've seen at a lot of the different websites. So an about me section, a link to a whole bunch of his socials, emphasis on his papers and presentations, and just kind of different slick ways of presenting it. Yeah, and I also like that they'll share their papers. I think that's a nice thing to see. So yeah, I think I really like this as an example of a Google site page. And then again, you can see that it looks like he chose to actually purchase a URL for himself, which you can do very easily through Google Sites. And then finally, so I've been debating, or I kind of went back and forth on whether I should include LinkedIn as an option for considering that a personal website. It's kind of debatable whether it is or not, but I mean, I think it serves a lot of the same purposes as a personal website. It allows you to communicate some things about yourself beyond just your CV. It increases your visibility. It's a way to centralize your online presence. You can include links to your different socials. So I think it does do a lot of the things of a personal website. So if you're like sitting through this presentation, you're like, I don't want to do any of this. This sounds like too much work. Then, emphasizing your LinkedIn and zhuzhing it up a little, I think is totally a valid option. So I really like Chanaru's LinkedIn just because she included a whole bunch of extra details. So, she actually has an about section, and she really highlights all of her experience. And again, she was just on the academic job market. So I think that's part of why her LinkedIn is really up to date. But, and emphasizes her publications. So I think you can use your LinkedIn in a bit of the same way as a personal website if you really are not interested in trying to build one. So yeah. So just to summarize a bit, what we saw on a whole bunch of the different websites, what we should include. So I think the things that are bolded and italicized are the things that I think are like the bare minimum of what you should include on your website. And we'll get a little bit into like the process of building a website. And I think, one thing that's really beneficial is to just get something up there. You don't have to have everything all complete. I started building my website like 5 years ago or so, and I've still been adding stuff. I think it's really just about getting something up there for now, and then you can always just be continually adding it to it. But I think in terms of the bare minimum types of things to include, you want to include your background, so your education, a little blurb about yourself, maybe both personal and professional details, a PDF of your CV, links to your social media, and contact information. I think these are all really important things to include. And then from there, you can really build on that. So including things like publications and projects, and expanding a bit on those in a way that maybe gives people a little bit more information than what they would just find on your CV. And then finally, including personal details. So I think this is where you really get to have fun. So including pictures of places you've been, or recipes, or writing a blog. I think all of these are things that you can definitely include as well. So now we can get into all of the specific options I think there are for actually building and hosting your website. So the first option that I'm going to talk about is LinkedIn. So, I mean, can you all raise your hands? Does anybody here have a LinkedIn? Yeah, okay. So pretty much everyone already has one. So I don't need to really spend that much time on this. But yeah, I think it does a lot of the things that a personal website should. But I think one important thing to note is, because it may not be visible to people who don't have a LinkedIn, which there are some of them, I think it does have some drawbacks in that respect. And also, it's less fun. You can't include as many personal touches. So the next option I'm going to talk about is Squarespace. So this is, I don't know about y'all, but I've been getting spammed with ads for it from all sorts of different places. So that's the main reason I chose Squarespace. But there's a whole bunch of different options that are really similar to this. There's WordPress as well. And these are paid services that help you build your website, host your website, and purchase a domain. So Squarespace specifically is, I think the cheapest option is like $12 a month, which to me is like wildly excessive for something that can be done for free through other services. But if you actually want to go ahead with the Squarespace option, which I think is totally valid, so you'd want to create a Squarespace account. You can pick from all sorts of templates that they have already. And then if you're still not sure whether you actually want to go ahead with using Squarespace, you can get a 14-day free trial to just try things out. And so I wanted to show you just a little bit about what it looks like on the back end for actually editing a Squarespace account, because I think that's one of the important things to consider with this is not only like the initial cost and the amount of effort in startup, but the cost and time and effort in maintaining the website. Because if you have a website and it's too much of a pain for you to edit it and it falls out of date, like some professors' websites that I've seen, I think that's an important thing to consider when you're picking how you're going to host and build your website. So this is, if you choose to go with the Squarespace option, I just have a free trial at the moment. I didn't actually buy Squarespace, but I wanted to look at what it looks like on the back end. So I just chose one of their templates. And from there, it's super easy to actually make modifications. So from the dashboard, you can see your website. And then if I want to edit it, I'm the creative director of Rachel Inc. And I just say save, and there, I've edited my website. It's that easy. So I will give them this. Squarespace, you pay a lot of money for it, but it is super easy to make modifications. But as I pointed out, so At the moment, I'm still on a private version of Squarespace, and so it's not actually published to the public. So that's one option that you can go with if you're interested. And then the next option I want to talk about is Google Sites. So in my opinion, if you're interested in building a website, but you're not, you're not into the nerd chic option, if you don't want to go with GitHub, I think Google Sites is a totally valid option, and I think is really good. So you can do it for free through your Google account. So you just go to this link here, and you select a template, and then it's very similar to Squarespace, where you just type and publish, and then it's pushed. And so some things to keep in mind here. When you go with Google Sites, you don't get the domain necessarily that you want. And the actual hosting and website modification is free. But if you actually want to purchase a domain, you can do that through Google Sites. But otherwise, you'll end up with a kind of ugly looking domain. I think it's of the form sites.google.com/view/ whatever your thing is. So, I mean, maybe you don't really care what your website URL is, but for me, that's a little bit too ugly. And so I think I would probably at that point purchase a URL. But again, to just show you a little bit of what it looks like on the back end for actually building a Google Sites. So here I've logged into my Google account and I've gone to sites.google.com, and they have not that many templates, but they have a couple that you can pick from. And so let's build a sample website. So I chose portfolio. And so here, again, like Squarespace, it's very similar to just editing a PowerPoint. So no HTML has been involved. All I will have to do to actually create the website is, hi, I'm Rachel, human from Earth. And then if I want to create this website, I just hit publish. And then let's make this sites.google.com/view/rmoglen, and then publish it. And now if I want to see my actual website, I can view it. And there, now y'all could go to this URL, and I made a website. So it's super easy. Yeah. So I think if you want to create a website and you don't want to do the HTML, this is a really good option because it's super easy. And if you do decide that sites.google.com/view/rmoglen/home is not for you, they also have an option for purchasing a domain. So I started to go down the rabbit hole just to look at it a little bit, and it looks super easy. I think you just type in the domain that you want. If it's available, you just buy it. And again, this is a recurring payment. So it's somewhere on the order of $10 to $12 per year, unless you choose, I think like r.com was super expensive, but you probably don't want that. You probably want yourname.com. So yeah, I think Google Sites, good choice. And then finally, the option that obviously I chose to go with is GitHub Pages. So I guess who here has a GitHub account already? Okay, that's good. So yeah, if you already have a GitHub account and are comfortable with using it, I think GitHub Pages is honestly an option that's really cool because it's free. But if you don't have GitHub and you're not familiar with it, then that might be another reason to go with Google Sites, because do you really want to learn a whole new like interface in order to create your website and then also have to maintain it? So if a year passes in between the time that you're working on your website and you forget about it, then yeah, it'll be annoying to update. So definitely something to keep in mind. So to create a GitHub page, the account or the URL that you will get will be your username.github.io. And so in order to create one, all you have to do is create a new public repository called your username.github.io. And then pushing index.html to that will create your website for you. So it's really straightforward to just like create the website itself. And then from there, you're open to customizing it with any any templates that you might want to follow, or if you want to write your HTML code yourself, that's also an option. But I guess one thing to really highlight here is, so I think actually it doesn't necessarily have to be a public repository if you have a school account. So for instance, for me, my website is associated with a private repository, but as always with GitHub, if it is a public repository, keep in mind that you're pushing stuff to a public location. So I once pushed AWS keys to my public repo, and that was very bad. I think I racked up like $3,000 worth of charges that I didn't end up having to pay, but definitely pay attention to what you're pushing to GitHub if it is a public repository. And especially with something like your website where you're pushing like personal details and personal information, definitely keep in mind that if you are going with a public repository, you're pushing it to a public location.
And then from there, most people aren't going to write their GitHub website in the native HTML. They're actually going to download a CSS template and edit that. So that's the route that I went with. And I actually included a link to the template that I used. So if you really like my website, you can actually go out and get it for yourself. And there's a whole bunch of them on this Style Shout website. So for instance, if we want to look at the CV template I use, so this is it on Style Shout. And then here's the Style Shout website with a whole bunch of different templates that you can choose from. And then once you choose one, you can preview them and decide if that's actually the look that you want to go for. So for instance, on the CV website, that preview button is here. So you just scroll down, you can find it, look at it, decide if it's the one you want, and then you can actually go ahead and download the code for it. And you know, if you Google personal website template, there's a whole bunch of them out there. So it's really just a matter of finding one you like. One thing I really liked about the one that I chose, the CV template, is that it's super readable. So sometimes you'll download a template and you'll be like, I don't actually know how to modify it to make it say the things that I want it to say. Whereas this one was super readable and super customizable. So for instance, I wanted to add a section for my different projects that I've worked on. And that was really easy to do with the this template. But there's definitely some out there where I downloaded them and I was like, I don't know what's going on here. So now, similar to the Google Sites and Squarespace, we can take a second to look at what it actually looks like to edit a GitHub page. So in this case, we're going to be looking at actual HTML code. So this is my index.html for my personal website. So this is the main page of my personal website. And there's a lot of stuff that, you know, you can probably pretty much intuit what it's going to do. So, you know, there's the title of my website. You can scroll down here and you can see the different sections that appear on my website. So these all appear in the banner section. And then if we scroll down to the actual body of the website, you can see different sections. So now we're in the About section, and here's the text that is associated with the About section on my website. You can keep scrolling, education, and then, you know, some stuff at the end. I have my footer, citing where all my different socials. So, you know, really pretty readable. And for the most part, when I'm editing my website, I'm only ever really looking at the index.html. I'm not messing with anything else. I'm not messing with the CSS. So really, it's a pretty editable document I've found without really knowing that much about HTML. And so I wanted to show you a little bit about what it's like to actually edit your website. And so I was looking around trying to find some good examples of something small that changed on my website. And I realized, you know, I've been talking a little bit about, you know, keeping your website up to date. And look, my website is out of date. I'm actually a third-year PhD student. So I just changed that in my index.html. I can go ahead and save that change. And then if I want to view that change locally, I can go to where that file is in my stored on my computer and open it with Google Chrome. Now this will take a minute. So loading my personal website locally on my computer is really pretty slow because I have some kind of heavy stuff stored in it. But when you actually load it on like the internet, it's much faster. I'm not honestly totally sure why that is, but it does make it a little bit more tedious to edit locally, but still a nice way to see what your changes look like before you push them to the internet and everyone can see your changes. So scrolling down here, Now you can see that it says in my About Me section that I'm a third-year PhD student. That's good. That's what we want to see. And now we want to actually go ahead and push those. So we can look at the status of my GitHub repo, and you can see that I have modified index.html. So git add index.html, commit it. I don't have the best coding practice with my GitHub commit messages, but small change is, accurate description of what I've done. And then push. And there we go. So now it's pushed. Usually it'll take a couple minutes to be actually reflected in your website. So for instance, if I go to our moglen.github.io right now, it might not be available yet. Yeah, see here it says still second year PhD student. So it'll take a couple minutes for that to be actually visible on your website. But you can, if you really want to assure yourself, you can go to GitHub and make sure that your push is visible and, just give it a couple minutes to update. So that's what it looks like on the back end for actually editing a GitHub page. Now, going back to our presentation, we can look at kind of a high-level view of what our different website options are. I have kind of summarized things from 4 different axes that you might be considering for when you're choosing where you want to be hosting and building your website. So the first is cost. We're all grad students here. Certainly for me, this is one of the main criteria that I wanted to consider. So for instance, LinkedIn and GitHub pages, both free. GitHub or Google Sites are free, but then if you want to purchase your own domain, it has a cost associated with that. And then Squarespace is by far the most expensive option. And then the second axis that I wanted to consider was the customizability. So how long or how easy it is to customize your website. So maybe this is something that is important to you. Maybe it's not. So certainly GitHub pages is the most customizable option. Pretty much anything you can think of, you can make that on your GitHub page. Whereas Google Sites and Squarespace are like somewhat customizable, and then LinkedIn is very much not. So really the amount of time that you're willing to invest kind of dictates how customizable your website can be. And then you also want to consider how long it'll take for your website to be discoverable. So this isn't something that I've really talked about too much, but this is something that you'll definitely notice as you're building your website, that when you first make it and publish it to the web, if you Google, for instance, your name, it will take a long time for it to show up. So for me, I think it took a year for our moglen.github.io to really show up in the search results when I Google myself. Now, this isn't always true. So for instance, LinkedIn has a decent reputation to begin with. And so your LinkedIn page is likely to become discoverable much more quickly. And then of course, LinkedIn has its own built-in search feature. So really you're much more visible very quickly with your LinkedIn. And then this will kind of get back to one of my final messages when we get to the next slide, talking about, as you're building your website, really getting something out there quickly, and then you can always make it a recurring task to update it. So really trying to get your website out there so that it can become discoverable faster. And then finally, something that I definitely think is really important to consider is how quickly it is, or how quickly you can edit and update your website. So, know yourself. If you're not willing to put in the time to keep your website up to date, then maybe you want to go with one of the easier options. So, if every time you have to update your website, you have to relearn how to interact with GitHub and relearn how to interact with HTML, then maybe you want to go with something that's a little bit easier to update because you want to, be able to keep it up to date all the time. And then also maybe right now you don't feel like you have the time to create it in the first place. So again, the LinkedIn or the Squarespace or Google Sites are definitely easier to update and to create in the first place than a GitHub page. So finally, we've talked a lot about different things. I want to just kind of summarize some final thoughts on the issue of what you should be looking for as you're getting started with building your website. So first, as I mentioned before, really consider what you're willing to pay. So I think you should think of your website as something that you want to essentially maintain in perpetuity. So in this case, you probably want something that you're going to be willing to pay long term. So if you're not willing to pay $12 per year for like the rest of your life, or sorry, $12 per month for the rest of your life, then maybe Squarespace isn't for you. So, there's definitely a cost associated with ease of creation and updating in that case. And then, as I mentioned, you don't really have to get everything up at once. So I really consider my website a work in progress at all times. So, you can look at mine right now. And I think, for instance, the map that I have on my website, definitely intend to add some more places to that. I've traveled more places than is reflected there. So I think you can always think of it as a work in progress. You just essentially want something that's perpetually presentable, but not necessarily complete. And this kind of gets back to the idea of discoverability and really just getting something up there quickly. Now, as I mentioned, really you want to know yourself. So how easy is it going to be to update your website and add more content as you grow and develop in your career? So definitely something to consider. But at the end of the day, if you think that you're going to have lots of time to devote to this, then maybe you'll enjoy kind of the challenge and the fun and the creativity associated with a GitHub page. So really, this is something for each of us to decide. And I definitely think there's, an upside to picking the GitHub page. But if you don't think that's for you, then that's totally okay as well. And then some of the visual lessons that we've learned looking at some of the different examples. I think one thing that you really want to look at is, there's different structures of websites. So for instance, Yutong's website that we looked at had lots of different pages versus my website and Eric's websites are all kind of one page. So this is just kind of a simple style choice that you can make. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different style choices that you can make. How fancy do you want to be? Do you want the CSS to be for your website? All of these aesthetic choices are things that you're going to have to face. And this really just comes from clicking around and looking at different examples. And this is why I tried to provide a bunch of them so that you can see and think about which ones do you like best for yourself? What do you like most aesthetically? What do you think is most readable? So that is all personal preference and creativity. And this is where you really get to have fun. And then a really important thing to consider is readability across platforms. So as you're building your website, some of the platforms like Squarespace and Google Sites have a handy feature where you can look at it and see whether or not your website is easily readable in mobile format. So I think they just have a button that you can toggle and you can look at it in mobile format. GitHub Pages doesn't have that. So definitely something to be careful with. So, what you should do is open your website on your phone, make sure it looks still readable, that there's no font running off the page or images looking super wonky. You definitely want it to look presentable across all different platforms, and then also play with just resizing your window. Does it still look good? Zoom in, zoom out. Does it still look good? So just kind of some simple aesthetic things to consider as you're building your website. And then finally, as I mentioned, it'll take a little while for your website to rise in the Google search results. So this is really just motivation to get you to push something as quickly as possible. Even if your website isn't quite complete, you can always add to it later. You just want to get something out there so that it can start being more visible. So that's everything I have. I'm happy to answer any questions now. And of course, feel free to reach out. Here's my email. So if you're having any questions as you're building your website, I'd love to answer them and walk you through them. I really think it's a fun process, and I had a lot of fun making mine. So I'd love to help you make yours as well. And then of course, here is a link to my own website. If you like it and want some inspiration, it's there. And also, just me getting a little plug-in. So yeah, thank you all for listening, and I'll gladly take any questions.